Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session at ICPR. Thanks, Joost, and all the team for inviting me to moderate this session about qualitative aspects of studies with ayahuasca. We just had a very powerful and moving session about ayahuasca in another room. I'm still vibrating with all the energy, the contradictions that came up, and I think this is an interesting complement. So today we're going to have Lucas Maia, a biologist with a master's degree in psychopharmacology and a PhD in mental health. He's studying the therapeutic effects of psychoactive plants and substances for psychiatric disorders since 2009. He's currently a research fellow at the International Cooperation for Ayahuasca Research and Outreach, ICARO, from the University of Campinas in Brazil. Lucas is in an area with not very good connection, so he has pre-recorded a talk that will be exhibited. And then Anya Loizaga-Welder, she's a German-Mexican clinical psychologist and psychotherapist with a PhD degree in medical psychology from Heidelberg University, who has been investigating the therapeutic potential of the ritual use of psychedelic plants for over 25 years in collaboration with indigenous healers. She's a founding member and director of research and psychotherapy of the Nierica Institute for Intercultural Medicine in Mexico and is adjunct professor and researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, where she researches the therapeutic potential of psychedelics in intercultural therapeutic settings. Additionally, Anya works as well as psychotherapist with a humanistic and transpersonal orientation in private practice. So we'll start with Lucas and then Anya, and then we're going to have 10 minutes for questions from the audience.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucas Maia. I hope you all had an excellent conference and still enjoying today's activities. I'm very glad to share this session with Enya and Eduardo, two friends and inspiring researchers. I will present to you the results of this study that comprises my doctoral thesis, entitled Therapeutic Effects of the Ritual Use of Ayahuasca as Experienced by People Facing Severe Physical Illness, a qualitative study. It was conducted at the School of Medical Sciences from the University of Campinas in São Paulo State of Brazil, under the supervision of Professor Luiz Fernando Toffoli from the Department of Medical Psychology and Psychiatry. I look forward to getting your feedback or questions. Also, if you want to talk personally later, please contact me by email or the conference app. It would be great to share some thoughts on this topic. I'm currently living in the woods in a place close to Brasilia, the Brazilian capital. And that's why we are broadcasting my talk, because I don't have enough internet quality here. Okay, so let's start. Disease that threaten life or generate severe incapacitation can raise deep existential issues and trigger profound psycho-spiritual processes, often accompanied by suffering and distress. In this context, studies with serotonergic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin have shown therapeutic effects on anxiety and depression associated with life-threatening diseases, especially cancer. Increasing evidence from animal and human studies indicates that ayahuasca can have anxiolytic and antidepressant properties. Preliminary but pioneering studies also point out that ayahuasca ritual experiences may engender therapeutic outcomes during the treatment of physical illnesses, including cancer. Indeed, currently, An increasing number of people have sought out ayahuasca after the diagnosis of physical illnesses. Nevertheless, this phenomenon has been little studied so far, and the psychological mechanisms of the possible therapeutic effects are almost unknown. Thus, the purpose of this study was to use qualitative methods to investigate how the ritual use of ayahuasca influences the ways people with severe physical illnesses understand and relate to their illness and treatment. For this purpose, we applied qualitative research methodology in a retrospective, exploratory, and descriptive approach. Participants were purposely chosen to construct an information-rich and heterogeneous sample. Participants were encouraged to engage in the study if they had participated in at least one ayahuasca ceremony after diagnosis of an acute or chronic illness, usually life-threatening or that can cause severe incapacitation. Data was obtained by semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions, 2 hours each on average. The content was then transcribed and submitted to thematic analysis in an exploratory, inductive, and semantic approach. 14 participants, 7 male and 7 female, from 24 to 61 years old, residing in 7 cities from 4 Brazilian states were included. The ritual context varied between institutionalized religions and independent neo-shamanic groups. And the medical conditions included 6 cases of cancer, 3 cases of HIV infection, 1 case of rheumatoid arthritis, and 1 case of ankylosing spondylitis, 1 case of multiple sclerosis, 1 case of ulcerative colitis with Barrett's esophagus, and 1 case of extremely severe psoriasis. We identified 13 themes covering psychotherapeutic, spiritual, and physical reported effects. Participants reported that the ayahuasca ritual experience facilitated the examination of illness' subjective etiology. That means that they usually included autobiographical recapitulation that led to identification of emotional, behavioral, or spiritual aspects related to the illness origin. As a result, new meanings to their illnesses could arise. For instance, some participants described that their illness as some participants described their illness as something that came for my good, or a gift, reporting that it brought positive life change, acting as a vehicle for transformation. Unlike before the ayahuasca experience, when the illness was seen as something that came for destroy or kill me, for example. This resignification process was linked to illness acceptance. Illness acceptance, in turn, seems to favor change in the relationship to the illness and the treatment, usually with better coping. At the same time, ayahuasca experience also facilitated existential reflections that influenced participants' views towards life and death. As a result, they reported less fear of death and greater appreciation of life, which was reflected in changes in interpersonal relationships, habits, and lifestyle. These reflections on meanings of life and death were permeated by reported effects on spirituality. Participants described that ayahuasca promoted a connection with their essence, spirit, soul, or the divine, and the strengthening of spirituality was associated with strength to cope with illness experience. Participants attributed to ayahuasca psychological and spiritual healing, which they linked with improvements in clinical outcomes. Autobiographical related catharsis triggered positive emotions that helped to reduce anxiety and depression symptoms, increasing psycho-emotional and spiritual well-being. Lastly, but not least, there were reported physical effects, including better tolerability of chemotherapy treatment, immunological stability, and chronic pain reduction or changes in the perception of pain. Okay, there are many details that could be discussed, but here we want to stress out 4 points. The first one is that many psychotherapeutic effects reported in our sample profile, that is, people with serious physical illnesses, are similar to those reported in studies exploring ayahuasca effects on other health conditions, especially psychiatric disorders, as addiction and eating disorders, but also effects described by non-clinical groups. The way ayahuasca exerts its therapeutic effects is an open critical topic of investigation, which some researchers have explored. In this context, our results resonate those of previous studies suggesting that ayahuasca therapeutic effects for many conditions may be related to the way it affects psychological mechanisms, including psychodynamic processes and mindfulness-related capacities. Second, it is essential to consider the role of possible placebo effects on the therapeutic outcomes reported. Evidence suggests that a positive placebo response is most likely to occur when the meaning of the illness experience is altered in a positive direction, as our results indicated. The ritual use of ayahuasca conveys key elements with symbolic significance, increasing the odds of placebo-related effects. However, symbolic effects do not rule out pharmacological effects. Therefore, the therapeutic outcomes reported in our study could be related to both pharmacologic and placebo effects. The third point refers to the ayahuasca therapeutic potential for end-of-life care. Others have already argued, and our findings reinforce the perspective that ayahuasca experience, like other psychedelics, if properly conducted and integrated, could be a possible tool in the management of death-related psychological distress, and then propitiate a better dying for some patients. Lastly, we believe that the ayahuasca health outcomes, including its possible immunological and analgesic effects, should be considered for deeper investigations. Clearly, this study design has important limitations, which we would like to highlight. That participants self-volunteering may favor a sample of individuals that presented most positive outcomes of ayahuasca experience. Moreover, these are self-reports and not a controlled cause-effect study design. Therefore, the reported benefits are subjected to memory biases and may have been influenced by confounding variables not addressed here. So, in conclusion, having these limitations in mind, this study suggests that the subjective experience induced by the ritual use of ayahuasca may facilitate illness acceptance through psychological processes that influence the meanings of life and death, and the meaning of the illness, favoring a more balanced relationship with illness and treatment. We would like to thank to all participants, our team, collaborators, and friends. I have listed all the references cited in this presentation. And obrigado, thank you.
Okay, Anya, your time, and then we'll move to questions at the end. Okay?
All right. Let me see. Can you see this already? No. Just trying to share the screen. I'm having a technical problem. Sorry about this. I hope you can all see my screen now. Let me see.
Yes, yes, it's
Okay,
working.
I'm sorry for the delay. I'm not such
It's perfect, don't worry.
and thank you all for your patience, and the organizers and collaborators of Open for the great work and the invitation to speak today about the contribution of indigenous plant medicine traditions to modern psychedelic medicine, acknowledging in this way the roots of this resurging field in mental health. And now my presentation is trapped, but it is advancing.
Sorry, I clicked wrong here. My fault.
I'd like to symbolically honor also the ancestral history of psychedelic medicine represented here to the Mexican Xochipilli, the Prince of Flowers, sitting in contemplative trance, his body covered with psychedelics. And on the background, a mural of Tepantitlan, the great goddess of Teotihuacan in Mexico, remembering that the ceremonial use of sacred plants has been a cornerstone for many great cultures. And in Mexico, the country where I had the privilege to be living the last 20 years, as in many other Latin American countries, there is a wealth of flora and fauna of psychedelics. Many of them are largely unknown today. When the Europeans discovered America, and they were overwhelmed by the depths of knowledge of the indigenous medicine at first, but later during the conquest, they disregarded it as primitive and then persecuted the practices with sacred plants as heretic. And even though there is a renaissance of psychedelic research around the world, unfortunately in Mexico, the country I've been working, this field is still to be reawakened from the ban, from the therapeutic and academic realm. There has been no clinical trials with psychedelics except ketamine that have been approved since the 1970s in Mexico. And the reason for this are huge regulatory challenges that are very time intensive and cost intensive to overcome, and the lack of funding for this research in Mexico. And hopefully this situation will soon change. After this historical lens, I want to offer a little peek to the present. The traditions with psychedelic plant medicines are still alive and coexist aside to the treatment offered by official health systems. And I think it's important to mention that traditional doctors often are highly specialized in their practice when they use plant medicines and when they are authentic doctors, and do very sophisticated work, which I would compare it to the sophistication we find in traditional Chinese medicine. The rituals that have been evolved around the plants, I consider them as very elaborate technologies of navigating, containing, and therapeutically directing non-ordinary states of consciousness. And these technologies have been explored in anthropology, but not, in my opinion, in sufficient depth integrated into medicine and psychotherapy. And I believe in this aspect, there's still growth potential for psychedelic medicine in a context of reciprocity and sharing the benefit with the cultures of origin of this medicine field. Just shortly to mention, the parallel to the research conducted in the renowned university with applications such as addictions, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorders of psychedelics, and others. Indigenous health professionals are using psychedelic plants and mushrooms for these conditions in many places. And as a clinical psychologist, my research into psychedelics has been alongside with studying the impressive work of my colleagues that are working in the field of psychedelic medicine and presenting here in this conference. Also conducing qualitative studies. Specifically, I've studied ayahuasca for the treatment of mental health challenges. Some years ago, I conducted a qualitative study on ayahuasca for the treatment of addiction. And then together with Canadian colleagues, I had the opportunity, based on a similar research design, to explore the role of ceremonial ayahuasca use along the healing of the continuum and recovering from eating disorders. I'm also collaborating in the ayahuasca treatment outcome project together with Peruvian, Canadian, and US researchers on an observational study of the efficacy of ayahuasca-assisted treatment for substance-dependent related mental health challenges. And however, in this in context of this presentation, I don't want to go in depth on the qualitative research. Just give in a nutshell those findings with the purpose of gaining more understanding of the therapeutic value of ayahuasca for the treatment of mental health challenges, and identifying variables that might influence the treatment outcome. Those paintings are from integration sessions with patients, so I very appreciate that they're sharing this with us here. From looking at therapeutic mechanisms, ayahuasca, as other psychedelics, work on one hand on the brain and have deep effect on the brain, and work in similar pathways that several psychopharmacological medications are used alongside with psychotherapy to improve several mental health conditions. And on the other hand, ayahuasca is a facilitator of psychological and spiritual processes by inducing deep non-ordinary states of consciousness that can facilitate body-oriented, emotional, cognitive processes, or very meaningful spiritual experiences. From my qualitative study, I have developed a model to synthesize how does ayahuasca work in our psyche, including also the spiritual part of the psyche. And on the one hand, we find deep body-oriented processes. People with addiction some of them have reported that after the ayahuasca ceremony, they have less craving for the substance they have abused before. People with eating disorders have reported they have a less urge to purge or less urge to binge eat. There seems to be a very important psycho-emotional impact on the purging experience, symbolically healing, relieving stocked, blocked emotion and guilt. And people report an increased appreciation of the body and increased embodiment alongside with other body-oriented processes. Another important area of therapeutic effects of ayahuasca is the emotional area, where ayahuasca, as other psychedelic, can facilitate the reprocessing of traumatic life experience, help to improved emotional regulation, increased self-acceptance, and also reprocessing of significant relationships, family relationships. This relational aspect is very important. Another important area are cognitive processes, insights in maladaptive behavioral and cognitive patterns and how to change them, increased self-awareness and increased self-efficiency, like this belief that it's able to change. And in the spiritual, mystical side of experience, which I've coded here is transpersonal, people have reported on one hand experience of being confronted with their own death, and to this being able to revalue the life. Very significant mystical experience encountering with the divine that have reorientated the sense of purpose in life and giving them a sense of peace. So there's several factors that influence treatment outcomes, because I think it's very important, like, to not fall into this pharmacological fallacy that we have found a treatment for mental health challenges here. One of the indigenous healers I worked with, he said, well, the medicine does 40% of the work if you're lucky, but the healer does 30% and the participant does another 30%. And if one of those three people don't work, one of those three ingredients does not work, the whole treatment won't work. And I think this is very important to keep in mind, that outcomes are influenced by the setting, by the participants, and by the quality, the composition, and the right dose of the medicine. That there's a very sensitive skill of inducing those and containing therapeutic, meaningful processes. Just in the realm of reciprocity, just want to shortly share that we are currently working on supporting the Yaqui people in northern Mexico with their Intercultural Treatment Center for Substance Abuse and other mental health challenges. where psychedelics will be introduced alongside with cultural adapted therapeutic, cultural adapted therapeutic programs to support indigenous people. And I hope this is an inspiration for other similar projects to be developed, and whoever is interested and wants to support with donation that can be done via Nierika Ace or via the River Styx Foundation. And yeah, just want to thank you for your attention. And in a nutshell, just reminder, there's so many things still that a psychedelic medicine can learn from indigenous cultures, and really hope that this small presentation can make a contribution for this bridge building. And I'm open here to listen to your questions.
Thanks, Anya. Congratulations. Thanks, Lucas. 2 important talks. I'll read questions for you just in case you're not seeing them, but anyway, the audience doesn't get to see those. So the first question is from Lucia Terpak. She directs it for Lucas, but I think both can comment if you want. If all the participants participate in integration, and what is the role of integration in meaning making and positive illness outcomes?
Actually, our participants were from different contexts. For example, from religious groups or neo-shamanic groups, urban groups. So the integration practices varied between among the participants. For example, among the religious groups, usually there are not formal integration practices, whereas in neo-shamanic groups, it's common, for example, sharing their experiencing after the ritual and other kinds of practices, integration practices. So we really didn't investigated that about a possible role of the integration, and actually it is very hard to investigate because, as Professor Toffoli addressed in his talk in Thursday, I think, integration is still poorly understood in this psychedelic field, and regarding the possible role in the meaning making in about the illness significance, our results suggested. For example, as our study was entirely retrospective, that is, we interviewed participants after the experience, and some of them a relatively long time, for example, months or years after the ayahuasca experience that led to changes regarding illness meanings. But just to clarify, all participants had their ceremonies, their ritual use of ayahuasca during the treatment and the illness ongoing. But we interviewed them after that. So we really don't know if these supposed effects actually occurred during or after the ceremonies. Possibly both. Possibly it's a whole process previous the ritual, during the ritual, the effects, acute effects, and the post effects, the afterglow phenomenon, and a role of integration in all this scenario. It involves a lot of psychodynamic process, and it's hard to address specific roles for integration.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Lucas mentioned, that people can have different capacities to integrate such an experience based on previous experience, cultural surroundings. So I do not think that all people need a therapeutic structural integration aid. Some have the innate capacity to reflect on their experience in a way that can have beneficial outcomes. But for many people with a clinical issue, many patients, the bridging in between psychotherapy and the work with ayahuasca can be mutually benefiting, can be really helpful to overcome a psychological challenge.
Okay, thanks. Let's try to be brief so we can answer. There's about 6 questions or so. They are very specific, so we can answer shortly. Emilia Sanabria is asking, what are the ways we can strengthen dialogue and exchange between qualitative and quantitative approaches in psychedelic sciences? At the moment, it seems to reproduce hierarchies in mainstream science.
Yeah, it's a very good question indeed. I personally, I'm beginning to study mixed methods to integrate qualitative and quantitative data, but it is still a not so used method, and many times qualitative parameters are used just to complement the quantitative ones, and the quantitative ones are almost entirely the most significant for a data and science perspective. But I believe that qualitative research has many things to add for science in general. So that's why I'm trying to use this kind of method. But I am from the health science, so I have a lot of limitations regarding humanities and social science in this field. So I'm trying to get better in it and doing my best.
Okay, we have 3 more minutes, so let's just move on. If Anya does not want to comment on Emilia's.
And move on and go on the other.
Move on? Okay, so Bristol is asking, this question is for Anya. Can you speak a little more to the therapeutic healing that purging had for people who have eating disorders like bulimia? Bulimia, I don't know in English how to spell it out.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Actually, as a preparation for this qualitative study, we spoke to some mental health professionals, and they had huge concern that the purging in the ayahuasca could trigger bulimia, or could be like triggering for the bulimia. But interestingly, of the participants we interviewed, none of them stated that the purging was a trigger for bulimic purging. It was more that they felt that they finally could emotionally process what was below, what was like really like on the roots of the bulimic purging. And in this sense, they felt it was integrative for them and helped them not to engage in so often purging afterwards. So that's what we found from our limited sampling.
Okay, thanks. I think we can do one more. From James Phelps from CIIS, I guess. Thank you, Anya. What other medical symptoms do you think we should study next with ayahuasca?
Well, I think that difficult grief is a very important aspect, which Deborah Gonzalez in Spain is already studying. I think depression, anxiety, and existential questions, like existential crisis.
Okay, I think we're running out of time. I'll try one more. And if we got kicked out, I apologize. So Giorgio Mauro is asking, the current research reads this phenomena through the lens of neurocognitive psychology. Do you not think that we should look at this phenomena with other psychology models that bridge the gap between Western science narratives and archetypal domain like the Jungian psychology?
I'm sorry, I did not get the whole question. Could you synthesize?
He's asking, what's your opinion on interpreting and including Jungian psychology into this picture?
Well, I think this is a great tool because there's, as are other psychological disciplines, I don't think that one is more effective than others, but I do definitely believe that there's a wealth, including Jungian psychology, due to the symbolic and archetypal material that can come up in ayahuasca.
Okay, thank you both. Thanks, everybody. I think Erwin is about to say that we're out of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to say that. It was a really great discussion. And I think also the last question would be really interesting also to dive more deeply into. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you very much, all three of you. Great that you can be here from the other side of the Atlantic, I think, all of you. So that's really beautiful that we can do this in this way. So we have a 10-minute break, or 9 minutes at the moment. And there are a couple of things. So there is a workout session now for the people that would like to do a brief, short break with some movement and exercise. And then we have 2 tracks coming up. And the first one is the traditional medicine track. And the other one is ayahuasca for mental health. So that might be a hard choice for many of you, but I think both of them will be really interesting. So I hope to see you all soon. And thanks again. Thank you very much. And see you all soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. And we're still available in the other room after.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. So please go to the after talk session.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can continue the conversation there. Yeah. The link is there. Do you see it?
Yeah, it's on the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to click in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
See you over there. Bye-bye.
All right. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.